The airport smelled of fresh coffee and jet fuel, a combination that always reminded me of beginnings and departures. I wheeled my suitcase across the polished tiles, the wheels clicking rhythmically, and clutched the boarding pass stub I'd kept from previous trips, a small talisman against the chaos of travel. Seattle's early morning light filtered through the terminal windows, painting the space in soft grays and pale gold. I straightened my coat, smoothed my hair, and adjusted the strap of my bag over my shoulder, savoring the brief moment of anticipation before the world intruded. My mind wandered to my family, to the small hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd recognize me beyond the role I'd always been assigned. The youngest daughter, the one who sacrificed quietly, the one no one seemed to notice. I approached the check-in counter, feeling a light thrill in my chest as I handed over my passport. The agent's polite expression faltered, and her eyes flicked to the computer screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your flight's been canceled," she said, her tone neutral but final. My stomach dropped. I blinked, thinking it must be a mistake. "Canceled?" I repeated, my voice hollow. My mind raced for reasons, logical explanations I could cling to. Then I remembered. The boarding pass stub in my hand, the plans meticulously arranged, everything suddenly seemed like it had been stripped away in an instant. A slow, sinking realization spread through me as the familiar warmth of optimism gave way to shock. And then it hit me. My sister, Lori. It had to be her. She had always liked her pranks, her sense of control over everyone else's lives. This wasn't a mix-up. This was deliberate. I tried calling her, my fingers shaking slightly as I pressed the buttons. No answer. I scrolled through messages, searching for a clue, and my phone buzzed with a text from Lynette, my friend who always seemed to know when something was off. "Something weird's going on with the airline," it read cryptically. I stared at it, feeling a mix of gratitude and unease. The room around me buzzed with other travelers, all caught up in their own minor dramas, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. I remembered all the times my voice had been ignored at family gatherings, my sacrifices overlooked, my achievements minimized. The anger simmered, a sharp contrast to the disbelief that had frozen me moments before. I clenched my fists, feeling the familiar rush of strategic thinking, the determination to reclaim agency I had always been denied. People rushed past with their luggage, wheels rolling and boarding announcements echoing in the cavernous terminal. I felt the isolation sharply, as though the bustling crowd emphasized the gap between what I hoped for and what I had received. My thoughts drifted back to smaller injustices, the family pranks and the subtle ways I had been made invisible over the years. "They think this is a joke," I murmured under my breath. "I won't be their punchline." The boarding pass in my hand, crumpled slightly from my grip, became a symbol of control taken from me and of the quiet strength I needed to reclaim. I took a deep breath, feeling the first stirrings of resolve cutting through the haze of betrayal. I closed my phone and set it beside me, gripping the handle of my suitcase with a new sense of purpose. The shock was still there, lingering, but beneath it, a resolve had begun to solidify. I wouldn't let this define me. I wouldn't let them dictate my worth or the path I would take. The early morning light outside seemed less like a backdrop to departure and more like a canvas on which I could chart my own course. Every step, every decision from here on would be deliberate. I thought about the ways I could respond, the strategies I could employ, the subtle but unyielding ways I could assert myself. A small, quiet smile touched my lips as I imagined turning the tables, not with noise or tantrum, but with precision and clarity. The terminal seemed to shrink around me, the clamor of passengers fading as my mind narrowed to focus. I studied the boarding pass one more time, noting the date, the flight number, the subtle imprint of cancellation. It was both a wound and a weapon, a reminder of the betrayal I had endured and a starting point for the retribution I intended. I glanced around, spotting Lynette in the distance, her posture relaxed, but her eyes alert, as if she sensed the tension in the air. Her presence was a lifeline, a reminder that even amidst family deceit, loyalty, and intelligence could guide me forward. The airport, normally a place of transition, had transformed into the arena where I would test my mettle. I breathed in, letting the cool air fill my lungs, and felt the tight knot of anger and disbelief loosen just enough to be shaped into determination. I would act, I told myself, not impulsively, but with the sharp edge of intellect honed by years of navigating a family that thrived on manipulation. I adjusted the strap of my bag, squared my shoulders, and allowed the first hints of a plan to take root. The canceled ticket was more than paper. It was the spark that would ignite a careful, calculated response. I had been underestimated for too long, and it was time to rewrite the rules, to remind those who thought themselves clever that I, too, possessed foresight and strength. The journey ahead would be fraught with tension, but I welcomed it. I settled into a quiet corner of the terminal, dragging my suitcase beside me and letting the hum of early travelers wash over me. The constant rolling of wheels across the tiles, punctuated by snippets of announcements over the intercom, felt both mundane and oddly comforting. I watched families rushing toward gates, business travelers absorbed in phones, and strangers navigating the chaos with practiced ease. I adjusted my bag strap and let myself exhale slowly, reminding myself to stay vigilant, to think strategically, and to keep my emotions contained. It was a familiar pattern: stay alert, observe, analyze, and act only when necessary. The airport had become a temporary arena, a place where patience was as valuable as speed. I tried calling Lori again, the phone buzzing with unanswered rings before diverting to voicemail. Frustration mingled with a creeping suspicion. I noticed subtle alerts from my email and banking app, small red flags that suggested more than coincidence. And something was off, and I couldn't ignore it. People passed me by, oblivious to the tension radiating from my corner, and I scanned their faces, taking mental notes, calibrating their moods, imagining their intentions. The patterns of my family, manipulation, subtle control, and staged surprises surfaced in my mind. Each memory sharpened my sense of caution, reinforcing that rushing headlong would only play into Lori's hands. I reminded myself, stay calm, gather information, and plan. Scrolling through social media on my phone, I caught glimpses of family posts, Lori's subtle boasts, little victories flaunted online, and remarks that hinted at knowing more than she should. I felt the old sting of being underestimated, of achievements minimized, and yet there was a clarity in the irritation. Impulsivity would only betray me. Patience, however grudgingly, would serve better. Even small interactions with strangers at the terminal, a nod here, a brief exchange over luggage there, reinforced my adaptability. I could read a room, gauge reactions, and blend observation with discretion. Each moment built a silent tension inside me, an undercurrent of plotting tempered by self-restraint. Then a message from Lynette blinked across my screen, revealing a fragment of information about my sister's plans, just enough to ignite my senses. Betrayal stung sharply, but it was paired with the glimmer of an opportunity, a foothold to reclaim some control. I reread the message, weighing its implications, imagining possible responses without revealing the slightest hint to those around me. The terminal faded into the background as my mind pivoted toward strategy. Every glance, every small movement in the airport became a piece of intelligence, and I felt the simmering resolve hardening, the awareness of what had been taken from me slowly morphing into a drive to act with precision. I touched the boarding pass stub once more, the worn edges familiar beneath my fingertips. It had survived countless trips, yet now it represented disruption, betrayal, and a personal challenge. I let my eyes wander over the bustling terminal once again, framing every observation within the mental map I had been constructing. Plans for reclaiming agency took shape quietly, each option measured, each potential reaction weighed. I wouldn't leave this space without a clear understanding of my next steps, without a plan that leveraged intelligence over emotion. Every moment spent waiting, observing, and reflecting brought me closer to a calculated response. By mid-morning, the ebb and flow of travelers around me had become almost meditative. My initial shock had settled into a sharp, simmering focus. I knew the hours ahead would be critical, not for rash action, but for thoughtful preparation. The airport, usually a mere point of departure, had become a proving ground for patience and strategy. I leaned back slightly, hands resting lightly on the handle of my suitcase, eyes scanning, ears attuned, and heart steadying. Each breath reinforced the quiet determination that had begun in the early morning hours. I couldn't move yet, but I knew every moment here was sharpening my next step. I would leave this terminal with purpose, with clarity, and with the first outlines of a plan to assert the strength I had long been denied. By late morning, the terminal felt almost hypnotic in its routine, a constant stream of travelers moving in patterns I could barely name. I perched on a bench near a wall of windows, my suitcase at my side, scanning the flight boards and occasionally glancing at social media updates. Small inconsistencies in the notifications from Lori's accounts caught my attention, a pattern of timing and wording that didn't quite align with casual behavior. A twinge of suspicion stirred, sharpening my focus. Each detail mattered. Each discrepancy was a clue in a game I hadn't asked to play. I watched the subtle movements of strangers, their micro-expressions, the way they jostled or hesitated as they navigated the crowd. The terminal became a study in observation, my mind cataloging behaviors and reactions while remaining unseen. Then, pieces began to fall into place. A text from Lynette hinted at some hidden maneuvering, and I reflected on past experiences, family pranks that had crossed the line, small manipulations that always seemed harmless until they weren't. Twist after twist built the realization this wasn't a simple prank. Lori's actions carried layers of control, maybe even financial or emotional leverage I hadn't anticipated. The shock of betrayal was tempered by clarity. I wasn't powerless. Every instance of being undermined in the past now served as a blueprint. I mapped potential moves, calculating what could happen if I responded prematurely versus waiting for the right moment. It was a puzzle, and I intended to solve it with precision rather than rash emotion. I settled deeper into my seat, letting my breath even out, letting patience become my instrument. Impulsivity would only feed the narrative she intended. I observed interactions around me, a mother calming a crying child, a businessman shifting papers anxiously, travelers comparing notes with companions. Each interaction reinforced my adaptability and reminded me that context mattered and timing mattered more. I replayed conversations in my mind, rehearsing what I would say, how I would maintain composure, and when to act to maximize control. The boarding pass in my hand, worn yet familiar, was a subtle reminder of disrupted plans and the autonomy I needed to reclaim. Every glance at it reinforced focus, patience, and the necessity of strategic planning. The hours in the terminal became a quiet battlefield. I traced patterns of Lori's typical behavior, noting triggers and weak points. My simmering determination gained strength from every observation and every reflection. The frustration of being dismissed and overlooked transformed into a calculated calm. I imagined my next steps, each option weighed for consequence and opportunity, envisioning how subtle actions could shift the balance back in my favor. The terminal's hum, once background noise, now accompanied my mental preparation. I was present, alert, and plotting, a patient strategist in a space designed for movement, yet I moved only in thought, conserving energy and focus for the moment that demanded action. As the afternoon light softened through the terminal windows, I felt a steadiness settle over me. The initial anger and disappointment had morphed into resolve. Every observation here sharpened my next move. I just had to wait for the right moment. I adjusted my bag, tapped the boarding pass against my palm, and allowed myself a quiet acknowledgement. The control was mine to reclaim, but only through careful, deliberate action. The airport, once a place of frustration and uncertainty, had become a crucible, forging patience, clarity, and determination. And in that realization, I found not just a strategy, but a renewed sense of agency that I intended to wield wisely. By early afternoon, the terminal had quieted slightly, the rush of travelers thinning into a steady rhythm. I found a secluded corner near a row of charging stations, suitcase at my side, and allowed myself a few deep breaths to center my thoughts. The early shock of Lori's prank had evolved into something far more deliberate in my mind. I recalled past family patterns, how small manipulations often led to bigger consequences, and used those memories to shape my current strategy. Observing the airport staff and passing travelers, I noted micro-expressions, pauses, and unspoken cues, knowing even subtle details could inform the plan I was building. My mind worked like a chessboard, laying out potential moves Lori might make. Past behavior suggested financial pressure points, subtle emotional nudges, and even possible legal loopholes she might exploit. Twist after twist became clear. Her prank was layered, calculated, and aimed at testing my responses. I began mapping countermeasures, plotting not only defensive steps, but ways to regain control over my resources and my narrative. Each action I considered was weighed for impact and stealth. Rashness would be my enemy, patience my ally. Engaging subtly with staff and casual conversations, I gathered bits of information, flight delays, missed connections, and observations on the general flow of the terminal. My phone and handwritten notes became tools to track discrepancies in communications from Lori and to cross-reference these with prior patterns. Confirming suspicions that this was a premeditated maneuver reinforced my growing confidence. Every small detail mattered. The tiniest inconsistency could be leveraged later. I felt a surge of quiet satisfaction, a sense that methodical observation and patience were already putting me ahead in a game she assumed she controlled. I reflected on how the challenges and betrayals of my past had shaped this very ability to observe, to anticipate, to act deliberately rather than impulsively. The terminal, with its hum of rolling luggage and muted conversations, mirrored my own temporary confinement, stranded but vigilant, surrounded yet detached. I felt a calm sense of empowerment, the knowledge that control was a matter of careful timing and intelligence, not emotional reaction. Each step of my mental rehearsal reinforced self-control, and the echo of the old boarding pass served as a tactile reminder of disrupted autonomy and regained focus. By the time shadows stretched across the terminal floor, I had finalized my plan, committing it to memory and heart. Every calculated move had a purpose. Every moment of waiting was an investment in precision. I leaned back against the wall, suitcase at my feet, and allowed the simmering tension to settle into a poised readiness. The moment to act was approaching, though not yet arrived. I was ready, patient, and fully aware that the storm to come would be met with strategy, not panic. The quiet before it had never felt so potent, so full of potential. I stayed close to my corner of the terminal, suitcase at my feet, letting the late afternoon light fade while my mind raced ahead. The plan I'd drafted in silence was ready to be tested, if just in small measures at first. I moved deliberately, choosing subtle actions that wouldn't draw attention, sending a carefully worded email to an account Lori controlled, knowing she'd see it, forwarding internal airline policy snippets to my own backup address, monitoring reactions. Each small maneuver felt like a foothold regained. I watched carefully for a flicker in her tone, a hesitation in messaging, or a shift in posture. Subtle signs, maybe guilt, maybe annoyance. My heart stayed steady. This was not a rush act, but the first measured stroke in a battle for control. Collecting proof was the next layer. I downloaded chat logs, cross-checked timestamps, assembled correspondence and discrepancies. I filed away bank alerts, verifying that some charges Lori had access to were reversed without explanation. Twist S8 confirmed what I'd long suspected. This was not a prank, but a pattern of undermining. Each document, each inconsistency, reinforced the reality that I'd been manipulated. I arranged these pieces quietly. No visible movement, no overt declarations. The evidence was my shield and my sword. I felt a growing determination, the anticipation of response sharpening into focus. Then I tested her limits. I sent a mild inquiry in the family group chat. Has anyone noticed odd airline messages lately? Nothing overtly accusatory. I watched the replies. Lori responded defensively but vaguely, a sign of discomfort, a crack in her composure. That was the opening. Twist S9 revealed vulnerabilities I hadn't fully mapped, her instinct to dismiss, her frame of reference that I wouldn't notice. In that small reaction lay leverage. Internally, I cataloged it. I felt a moment of satisfaction, a quiet triumph. The move was subtle for others, significant for me. Every reaction became data. Every pause in her messages told a story. I reflected on all of it, the betrayals, the overlooked moments, the times I convinced myself that silence was safer than confrontation. But that silence had been my undoing. Now, the pattern of endurance was turning into strategy. The terminal's ambient bustle seemed distant, irrelevant to the real drama unfolding in my mind. I felt empowered not by anger, but by clarity. I had learned patience, and today it served me better than any impulse would. My resolve hardened, and a calm control settled over me. I knew what I could do, and when I should strike next. As the light dimmed, I reviewed every action I'd taken, every trap laid, every piece of evidence stored. The first strike had landed, quietly, deliberately, and the stage was set. The next moves would demand more, but I was ready. The tension tightened like a wound preparing to snap. I held on to the feeling, let it sharpen my senses, knowing that the real confrontation was still ahead. But now I held the advantage, however slight, and it was mine to use. Evening light crept through the airport windows as I lingered near a gate, suitcase in tow, heart jittery with tension. The day's cautious advances had set something in motion. I sensed it in the air. I reviewed my evidence again, cross-checking details, aligning dates, mapping patterns of unexplained access and reverse transactions. What seemed like a prank was now revealing itself as a web of hidden sabotage. The subtle misdirections, the delayed messages, the financial anomalies, they weren't random. They were coordinated. My pulse steadied as I absorbed the weight of that understanding. This was bigger than Lori. This implicated others, alliances I hadn't expected. The terminal felt smaller, closing around me like a spotlight. I was no longer waiting. I was preparing to act. I sent a carefully worded message to Lori through a shared family chat, referencing a detail she couldn't ignore. It wasn't an accusation, just a nudge. Odd billing alerts showing up. Did you see the same? I watched closely as her response lagged. What came back was defensive, but calculated. A reply meant to deflect without revealing too much. Twist S10, my first direct confrontation. Her tone wavered briefly, a crack in the shield she'd built. I sensed the shock of recognition. She realized I was no longer her victim, but a challenger. I maintained composure, kept my voice steady, chose my words carefully. The silence after her answer whispered louder than any accusation. That prompt reaction gave me insight. I turned inward, calculating risks and anticipating countermoves from the periphery of our family circle. Other relatives might intervene, side with her, or shift the blame onto me. I visualized possible confrontations, a sibling pressuring me to drop it, a parent questioning my integrity, a third party leaking or twisting data. Twist S11. I identified family members vulnerable to appeal or persuasion. I prepared contingencies, copies of my evidence, secondary witnesses, discreet legal counsel lined up. I'd never planned to go loud too soon, but I now had defenses ready, legal, emotional, psychological. I would not be blindsided this time. A storm of internal conflict stirred. My mind circled around problems I hated, loyalty versus self-protection, family bonds versus justice. I remembered times I swallowed my pain to preserve peace, but that peace had cost me agency, respect, voice. Could retaliation make me the villain? Could I preserve my integrity? I weighed those fears, then reminded myself, survival in this situation required action. I reviewed older betrayals, the lessons they'd forced on me, to wait, to observe, to anticipate. The terminal buzzed around me, travelers unaware, my plot unfolding quietly within. I felt that resolution settle firm under the storm of hesitation. Night deepened. I closed my phone, took in the terminal's ambient sound, rolling luggage, distant announcements, chatter fading. I felt the shift. A moment was coming when staying silent would be a choice, not a necessity. My plan was ready to escalate. The pieces in motion, the traps set, the alliances weighed. I drew in a slow breath, steadying my nerves, anchoring my determination. The reckoning was near, and every move from here would count. Late afternoon light filtered through the windows of a downtown law office as I sat across from a trusted colleague, documents spread out before me. I felt the pressure of everything that had led to this, each slight, each manipulation, each hidden jab of betrayal. My hands rested steady upon a folder of evidence I'd accumulated. The stakes had grown beyond just family drama. This was now about reclaiming my reputation, safeguarding my professional life, and asserting a voice they'd long dismissed. The silence between us was heavy, filled with the weight of possibility and risk. I observed her carefully, reading her expressions, measuring her reactions, aware that this meeting might shift the balance. My inquiry in the group chat had produced ripple effects I hadn't anticipated. Family members had circulated versions of conversations and vague remarks, framing me as unstable. Twist S12 surfaced. I discovered a coordinated effort to diminish my influence at work and within our social circle. Subtle rumors, quiet discrediting, reference to emotions over facts. The betrayal stung, but it also sharpened my resolve. This was not simply personal vengeance, it was defense. I reviewed every message leaked, every whisper circulated, mapping how my voice was being silenced. My strategy became urgent: regain control by turning perception back toward reality. The office air pressed around me. I inhaled deeply, grounding my nerves in purpose. I began covert arrangements. I enlisted a handful of trusted coworkers, individuals I had quietly helped in the past. I shared portions of my evidence, enough to secure their confidence without exposing my full plan. I contacted a legal advisor offhandedly, hinting at potential action, watching reactions. Each step was calculated to avoid triggering alarm. The risk of discovery hovered. I acted with caution. In meeting rooms, over coffee breaks, I dropped innocuous leads, questions that could be followed up on if necessary. I kept my public posture calm, professional, cautious. Every move built confidence. Every whispered hint pushed the pressure upward. Then I tested her emotionally. I sent a message to the family chat responding to a subtle jab she'd made. Interesting how certain voices always dominate. I hope that's not the case with me forever. It was vague enough to deny, strong enough to provoke. Twist S13 revealed cracks. She paused before replying, hesitated in tone, slipped in a qualifier. Her immediate reaction was guarded, defensive. That hesitation was gold. It confirmed that she perceived challenge now. Subtle cues, choice of words, delayed response, change in style, betrayed discomfort. I felt a quiet triumph, the first real sign that I could confront her psychological domain. The balance had begun to shift. Still, a moral tug ran deep. This was family, even if broken. Could retaliation stain me more than silence? Could I fight without betraying my own standards? I refused to become the villain in my own story. I reminded myself, standing up is not vengeance. Preserving integrity is not betrayal. Past lessons echoed. Never escalate too early, never lose control. The terminal and airport images from earlier chapters came back to me. Places of transit, pause, decision. In this office, I stood in a new kind of waiting zone, between confrontation and resolution. My loyalty to my own dignity outweighed ritual submission. Toward evening, I left the meeting with resolve renewed. I tucked my evidence into my bag, exchanged a grateful nod with my ally, and exited into cool city air. I inhaled deeply, tasting tension and possibility in the dusk. Tomorrow, I would act again, but more boldly. The moves ahead required precision, not force. I had learned beyond reaction. I was stepping into strategic counterattack. Every decision from here would count. I arrived at the family estate just as dusk settled, the sky dimming into twilight. My heart pounded with anticipation. Every move I had plotted, every subtle trap I laid, led to this room. I carried a slim folder of evidence in my hand, steady despite the tension. The moment required clarity, not drama. As I stepped into the conference room, faces turned toward me, parents, siblings, witnesses, all seated in a semicircle. I set the folder on the table, leaned forward, and looked directly at Lori. The silence stretched before I spoke. Tonight, I'm going to show you who's been hiding behind jokes and who's been manipulating all along. I opened the folder. Documents, timestamps, emails, financial discrepancies revealed layer upon layer of deceit. Twist S14. I exposed how Lori had quietly undermined my reputation, manipulated shared accounts, and erased my contributions from our collective memory. I laid out that pattern with calm precision. Each person followed silently. I saw surprise in eyes, discomfort in shifting posture. I maintained composure, letting her secrets speak louder than my voice. Then she struck back. Twist S15. In a sharp public counterplay, Lori attempted to discredit me in front of our family, twisting certain lines, claiming misunderstanding, insinuating aggression on my side. She raised her voice, tried to turn others against me. But I anticipated that move. I countered with extra proof, calm retorts, controlled tone. No explosion, no breakdown. The power in truth lay in its clarity. Her protestations fell flat. Her smirks flickered. The room's dynamic shifted as the family began to question, look up from their phones, glance between us differently. Finally, the moment I'd waited for arrived. Twist S16. They recognized the pattern. Acknowledgements came, hesitant apologies, quiet murmurs of regret, agreement that her actions had gone too far. I watched faces soften, guilt and surprise mingling. They couldn't reverse years, but they could validate the truth. I felt relief wash over me. My legacy, my autonomy, partially restored. I held myself poised, not triumphant in vengeance, but strong in integrity. The folder closed. Silence filled the room, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Still, the night didn't end with perfect resolution. Some wounds remained unhealed. Some alliances were shaken but not broken. But the groundwork was laid. The truth stood revealed. I felt the weight lift, even as the path ahead remained uncertain. The showdown closed, but the journey continued. The night ends, but the journey to rebuild and heal has just begun. Morning sunlight filtered through the windows of the family estate. I stood by the fireplace, waiting, file in hand, no longer trembling. The hush in the room was different this time, more stillness than tension. I'd spent the night combing through the last of the documents, cross-referencing every timeline, every thread that might have slipped through. There was one final piece left to uncover. As they arrived one by one, Lynette, my parents, the lawyer, a couple of longtime friends I'd asked to be present, I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about closure anymore. It was about truth and the right to own my story. I stepped forward and placed the file on the center table. There's something you all deserve to know, I began, looking each of them in the eye. Twist, S17. I revealed how Lynette had redirected power of attorney rights behind my back years ago, an action that explained missing funds, blocked medical authorizations, and decisions I had no memory of consenting to. The documents were time-stamped, notarized, and unmistakable. The room went silent, except for the sound of paper shuffling. I could feel my mother's breath catch. My father rubbed his jaw, like he did when caught off guard. No one spoke for a while. Lynette didn't deny it this time. Her silence was louder than any outburst. I laid out the logic, not in anger but with deliberate calm. Every deception, every omission, every manipulated form that had stolen not just my agency, but my dignity. Shock came first. Then came the denials, from those who still clung to their versions of the past. But others, especially my aunt, the attorney, even an old co-worker who had witnessed it all from the sidelines, they saw it clearly now. Twist S18, the tide shifted, and Lynette couldn't keep the facade any longer. Her role unraveled under scrutiny, her charm no longer enough to hold them hostage. The consequences weren't theatrical. There were no arrests or screaming matches. Just the quiet, final weight of accountability. Her credibility among us fractured, maybe for good. She sat stiff, staring ahead like she could will the room away. But there was no escape from truth. I stayed grounded. Not victorious, not vengeful, just firm. I'd told the truth with proof and let it land where it must. Later that afternoon, after the last conversation trickled into silence, I stepped outside. The air was crisp. I sat on the porch alone, letting it all catch up to me. My thoughts circled around the wreckage, but I kept steering them back toward what I had gained. I'd learned to draw lines. I'd rebuilt my own backbone. I didn't need their full forgiveness, just my own permission to move forward. No more walking on eggshells. No more pretending I didn't see what was in plain sight. There was healing to do. Real healing. And that didn't look like a perfect bow or happy ending. It looked like me choosing what to hold on to and what to leave behind. I mailed the final papers the next day, transferred what needed to be transferred, no theatrics, just quiet resolve. A week later, I cleaned out my email, deleted names I wouldn't invite back into my life. I called a friend I'd neglected during all the noise. We talked for hours, not about the past, but about everything ahead. It felt like breathing again. And yet, not everything was tidy. My father still hadn't called. My sister hadn't apologized. My mother sent one vague message, "Hope you're doing okay." I didn't answer it. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need to. Some things were worth leaving unanswered. And maybe that's the point. I survived not because I fought harder, but because I stopped asking for permission to stand my ground.